construction site. So, should we be surprised about the fact that Donald Trump handpicked someone like Herschel Walker to run against, and here's the interesting part, another black man? You know, did the fact that Herschel Walker is black, did that play a role in the decision making? Did that factor in when Donald Trump decided that he wanted someone or hand selected someone to run against Warner? Now, realistically, there were other more qualified people to run. Why Herschel Walker? In fact, it's my understanding that Herschel Walker didn't even live in Georgia at this time. Herschel Walker was a Texas resident who, after receiving a number of calls and I guess other messages from former President Trump, decided to move to Georgia about a year ago and enter the race. You know, pretty much what Dr. Oz did here in Pennsylvania. Move, establish residency, all with the pre-planned notion of winning an open Senate seat. You know, so I just need to know from the people of Georgia, I need to understand, you know, and I'm talking especially about people of color in Georgia. What is it that Herschel Walker said that resonated with people of color? And I get it. You know, he talked about his Christianity, his faith, and how strong his faith was. But now, and I don't want to sound judgmental, and I'm not being judgmental when I say that sometimes politicians, well, for the most part, all the time, politicians will say almost anything to get elected. And sometimes a lot of what they're saying is completely outside their character. And for Herschel Walker to say he's a Christian, he's a church member, strong in his faith and his commitment to, you know, his Lord and Savior, yet these allegations popped up of him paying for abortions for women he impregnated. And then he says, well, I'm pro-life, I'm anti-abortion. Well, you can't have it both ways. So I'm at a loss as to understanding what the hell happened down there. Stacey Abrams put in place, I guess you call it a political machine, right? I mean, after years of organizing and voter registration and drives to raise funds and to, I guess for lack of a better term, nurture potential candidates, you know, Georgia, for it seems, at least in the last two election cycles, has become what they call a blue state. That being the case, what the hell? For Herschel Walker, I think he lost by a very narrow margin, probably less than 100,000 votes. But how did he get so close? How? Because, yes, I understand that the population in the state of Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, I think Georgia, in terms of people of color, is probably about 40% people of color. So that being the case, there was some, obviously, people, black and brown, who voted for Herschel Walker. And I just like someone from Georgia to call in and explain what the hell, why.
You know what I think happened, Ron?
What you think happened, bro?
What I think happened was they were, you know how they talked about the uneducated white males,
Yes.
how they counted on them to vote because they out of ignorance. Well, what I think happened here is the Republican Party and Donald Trump was counting on that same factor with the minority voters.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, because of Herschel Walker's celebrity, you know, just think about it. He was the first black man to win the Heisman Trophy.
No, he wasn't the first.
He wasn't the first.
Mm-mm.
But
Archie Griffin won 2 years in a row when he played Ohio State.
Okay.
And there was some before that.
Okay.
So he wasn't the first.
All right, but I remember clearly when he won the Heisman Trophy, the African American community was head over heels in love with him, you know, because he had a great college football career, you know, and we expected a lot from him. So he had a star of celebrity. He was a celebrity, and he had name recognition. And just like R. Kelly, he wasn't too bright. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it clearly showed when he spoke off the top of his head. He talked about vampires and werewolves and stupid stuff like that. But anyway, long story short, the vote for the African American community was split because unfortunately, when you give people a choice that's uneducated of two minorities, two black men who have a star shining on them, something about them that gave them name recognition. Because they're uneducated, a lot of those younger black folks down there that voted for Herschel Walker, and it wasn't that many, you know, it was the white Republicans that voted for Herschel Walker, and they came out in full force, and I respect them. I appreciate the fact that they believed in their party and they came out and voted. But it was just, you know, a few 100,000 African Americans who just liked the fact that Herschel Walker was more popular to them than Warnock, you know, because Warnock is a pastor. He got a religious background, right? And people that don't have a relationship in the religious community, it was a toss-up for them. And with that toss-up being Herschel Walker, who I know about from football, or Warnock, a preacher. If you're a street-level barbarian and you don't have a religious background, you're going to go with Herschel Walker in most cases, unless somebody guides you into Warnock. And that's just my opinion, you know.
Well, with respect to Herschel Walker as a football player, he was a phenomenal football player, you know, and he played football for a lot of years. And in as much, Herschel Walker probably took some head trauma, right? I mean, it is expected that if you're going to play the game of football, which is, you know, probably the ultimate contact sport, at some point you're going to receive some concussions. And, you know, it's reasonable to assume that the same thing happened with Herschel Walker. And it seems as that's kind of borne out by the fact that if you listen to Herschel Walker speak, some of what he says, like you mentioned, the vampires and werewolves, you know, if you're running for a position of power, position of authority, you need to have an understanding of the needs of the people, understanding the political process, how the system works. And where do you get an understanding of the political process talking about vampires and werewolves? You know, I don't see the correlation there at all. And, you know, I don't have anything personal against Herschel Walker because I don't know him. But as a black man, I am offended by some of what he says, the nonsensical way in which he says it. And what also offends me is the fact that Herschel Walker comes across as an appeaser. And what I mean by that is for for us as Black people, we've always had people who were willing to go against the interests of Black folks to support others. Let me give you an example. So when the Europeans came to Africa and they came to capture Africans to put us on the slave markets across the globe, the Europeans would never go beyond the beach. They stayed on the beach, and they would normally have an agreement with a local ethnic group to go and capture their enemies and bring them down to the beach. It would be loaded onto ships. Well, the Europeans couldn't go in because they didn't have a natural defense against malaria and some of the other viral organisms that were prevalent in Africa at the time. So they would send us to capture us. And this race in Georgia seems to be another example of us being sent to capture us. Because as I said, there were more qualified applicants, or candidates rather, in Georgia who were more articulate, who had a better understanding of the needs of the people of Georgia. I mean, Herschel Walker just got there a year ago. How much have you learned about, the Georgia of 2022 as opposed to the Georgia that you left years ago when you became a football player? Georgia has changed in many ways, politically, socially, economically. A lot of people from the North have relocated down to Georgia. So now what you have is Georgia trending blue or Democratic in these last election cycles. So it seems as if, Herschel Walker has that appeasement mentality. And I find that offensive in this time. I had hoped that we had moved past that as a people, that at least those who are elected would at least prioritize some of our needs instead of focusing solely on the needs of others. And, I suspect that is why Herschel Walker was hand selected by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for those in Georgia who may be listening, the phone number here is 888-304-4401. I'm going to repeat that, 888-304-4401. If you're listening, give us a shout and let us know from your perspective, from the perspective of a Georgian, what's going on down there? How in the hell did Herschel Walker come so close? After all of the work that Stacey Abrams has done to shift the state to the left, what happened with Herschel Walker? And while he lost, I think the takeaway from that is that Herschel Walker made inroads with certain groups. And I think the Republican Party in the next election cycle will do things a little bit different. They'll analyze, the exit polling, and they'll probably choose another candidate, one who's more articulate than Herschel Walker, one who has a connection, more of a connection with communities of color, and they'll try it again, right? And I think that those folks in Georgia, like Stacey Abrams, did so much organizing, is going to have to continue to organize, fundraise, and form coalitions in order to preserve all the work that they've thus far achieved. So if you're down in Georgia and maybe you're wondering what the hell, give us a call here and let us know what's going on down in Georgia. Because it's listening to Herschel Walker, it was an embarrassment.
But Ron, what I think is this. I'm not going to blame the entire Republican Party for Herschel Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you paid close attention to it, that was a Trump thing. right?
It was.
And Mitch McConnell and all those guys, they really wasn't behind this guy. They toed the line because they felt like they had to. If you notice, most of them, the Republican Party, distanced themselves from Herschel Walker, because they knew he was a disaster. But they are so busy banking on the Trump supporters for their votes, they don't want to piss off the Trump supporters. So they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, because in reality, the Republican Party came out to beat Stacey Abrams. They came out to beat her, and if those same people who believed in what's his name, the governor of
down in Georgia,
down in Georgia,
Kemp.
If they believed in Kemp the way they did for him to beat Abrams, those same people would have voted down the line for Herschel Walker.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, for all the reasons that you said, and because they were voting against Trump.
Now you raised an interesting point. Yes, I think that the 2020 election, presidential election, I think that that and the aftermath, the debacle on January 6th, and the amount of pressure that Trump was exerting on the governor and the Secretary of State down in Georgia, I think that alienated Trump from a lot of Georgia voters, specifically Republicans. So I think that for the most part, the Trump, the Trump experiment, for lack of a better term, I think that now it's proven to be a failure down in Georgia. If you look at the trends from these last election cycles, right? People are shifting away from Donald Trump. But, as it relates to Herschel Walker, the Republican Party spent hundreds of millions of dollars to win that seat, right?
Yes, they did.
So it's not that the Republicans didn't support Herschel Walker, because they did. I think Lindsey Graham went down there, and other members, the governor of Georgia, Kemp.
Well, see, listen, Lindsey Graham is the worst, because this guy changes his sees a background and opinion like the seasons change.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even say like the seasons change. He changed faster than the seasons. He's with whoever's winning,
Mm-hmm.
and he's so afraid of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, what I think about him, I think he digs up dirt on people. And, nobody talks about it, but, Lindsey Graham is gay, and it's been under wraps for so long, and he won't come out openly, but he knows that Trump will put him on blast, and that's why he went from with the insurrection, saying all the things that he said about Trump, even before Trump was elected back in 2015, some of the things that he said about Trump. But you look at what he said about Trump today. Trump done had a conversation with him, and now he's a 100% Trump supporter. He won't say nothing negative about Trump, and it's just sad. But again, when you compare the entire Republican Party, if this guy would have won, that was a sign that Trump still had power. You know what I mean? But Trump's influence over the Republican Party is waning.
I think it's way past waning now. I think that Trump has lost his grip on the Republican Party, and I think that right now the Republican Party has to go and regroup. Right after, Trump talked about a red wave, and that the Republicans would take control of both houses of Congress, and that's simply not the case. The outcome of the midterms was a clear rebuke of Donald Trump and
Yes.
Trumpism.
Yes.
Right now, the Republicans have a slim majority in Congress, and the Democrats have control of the upper chamber, the Senate. So, with Donald Trump's predictions simply didn't pan out. A lot of his candidates, like Herschel Walker, just lost here in Pennsylvania. He hand selected Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz lost.
But you see, he was using the same playbook that he used for himself, that their celebrity would get them over. And that's what he was counting on. Name recognition in their celebrity. He was not counting on their politics, because guess what? I don't even think they had great speech writers to help those guys out. You know what I mean? I think because they were handpicked by Trump, I think all the people who get out there for the Republican Party and get behind these candidates and put together their speeches for them didn't get behind Walker or Oz.
Well, I don't know. Even a great speechwriter would not have helped.
Herschel Walker, no.
Right.
I mean, that guy was just clearly an idiot.
Exactly.
He had too much baggage.
Nothing. I don't care, what speechwriter you have and how much money you pay for the speech. If you don't have the diction, if you don't have the vocabulary, if you just don't have a clear understanding, it ain't going to sound good.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of their legislative abilities, I don't think that was Trump's concern. Like you said, name recognition and celebrity. Once you get in there, then Trump will tell you how to vote.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that was a plan down in Georgia, because Herschel Walker, and again, nothing personal against him, but Herschel Walker is not qualified to hold a position of U.S. senator. He simply is not. And based on what we saw and heard from Herschel Walker, I'm hoping that this will be his only run for office. I'm hoping now that he'll go find something else to do other than pursue politics. Because again, for a lot of black men, myself included, I just find Herschel Walker to be offensive on so many levels. Well,
I can say I lost a lot of respect for him because I learned things about him that I didn't know, and he doesn't sound like a very smart man. He doesn't sound like an honest man, and he was a terrible representation of a father. So sometimes you have to stay in your lane, stay where you at. You know what I mean? Because however he was earning his money with his celebrity as being Herschel Walker, the football player, I think some of those people are going to choose not to do business with him anymore. I think this failed campaign thing, if he can't keep what was left in the coffers, I think he's going to be financially ruined.
Well, he's a retired football player.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure he gets a rather generous pension from the NFL. And, he can probably move back to Texas and, find some venture in sports, or I'm sure he has some investments that, he may be involved in. And, Herschel Walker's not going to suffer, right? I think it is the people of Georgia that would have suffered had Herschel Walker been elected to, represent them. If you think about it, down in Georgia, they elected Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Wow. But you know what?
So do you need someone else like that representing you? And look, nothing against Marjorie Taylor Greene, but some of her beliefs are right out of QAnon. And look, QAnon does have some information that is factual. But other than that, some of the stuff is just out of left field.
But Ron, the counties that she represent in Georgia
Mm-hmm.
are rural,
Right.
right? And in those rural counties there, the minorities are few and far between, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the old South, Georgia, Alabama mentality. You know, I don't remember who said it, but they talked about the people that voted for her, and that county has some of the most uneducated people in the state of Georgia that she represents. You know, so they're like cattle, you know, and they're against anything that don't feel like them, look like them, do what they do, because they are disenfranchised from the state, you know. So you know, they still think, you know, the Civil War is going on. You know, they still representing the Confederate and stuff like that. So you know, that's why she can say what she say and do what she do, because anybody that's Democratic that's going to try to win in that district can cancel Christmas. You know.
Well, you know, that's true. And, you know, in watching the election returns the other night, you know, they showed, of course, where the votes were coming from for Herschel Walker and for Warnock. And it is in the areas in and around Atlanta, in and around Savannah, in and around Columbus, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Those are heavily Democratic areas.
Because that's where black people live.
And those are, well, that's where the majority of the people live.
Mm-hmm.
The bulk of the people are within, you know, a couple of 100 miles of Atlanta, right? Atlanta's a major, it's the capital, major centers there, right? Major center for commerce. So, of course, people are living in and around Atlanta. Then Savannah, on the eastern coast of Georgia, another heavily Democratic bastion. And then down to the southwest, you have Columbus. And only thing in Columbus, Georgia is Fort Benning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in and around Fort Benning, you have, you know, a lot of people who may have resettled in the area who are Democrats. So, but to get elected to national office, you need some Democratic votes.
You do, but you know what was ironic? During some of the exit polls I saw on MSNBC, because I go from channel to channel to watch everybody. I even watch Fox. I want to get it all out because I want to have my facts right. One of the exit pollers came out and said that it was a husband and wife, that they went in there and held their nose and voted for Herschel Walker. And that was the sentiment of most of those Republican voters. They did it because they were trying to support Trump or support the Republican Party. And they said they held their nose to vote for Herschel Walker. And I think all those folks that voted for him, that was their sentiment. They didn't want that man, you know.
You know, well, I was watching, I think it was CNN, and the lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia was on the panel, and he said that he walked into the voting booth, looked at the two names, and turned around and walked out. He did not cast a vote. And he's a Republican. Mm-hmm. Lieutenant governor for the state of Georgia did not vote for the Republican candidate. And that just goes to show you, because typically people vote down the party line.
Yes.
Right? And that's both Democrat and Republican. Mm-hmm. You walk into the voting booth, you figure, I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote Republican. Or I'm a Democrat, I'm going to vote Democratic. But are you voting for the best people? Is this who you want representing you for 6 years in Washington? If this man, and again, Herschel Walker, is talking about vampires and werewolves, and he's running for office, what the hell are you going to be saying when you get into the chamber? How are you going to represent me? If you're talking about fantasies.
But they were hoping that if he was just going to be a body, and they were hoping that the puppet master would pull the strings on any vote that he had to make all the decisions.
Well, absolutely, that was Trump's plan, and that's why Trump handpicked him, because of course, and I think it's reasonable to believe that Herschel Walker would not put up much resistance to any piece of legislation that Trump wanted pushed if he had been elected.
Absolutely.
I don't think you're going to get any pushback from Herschel Walker. I think Herschel Walker would have known from day one, I'm in way over my head. You get down there, you get assigned to a committee, right? And now the work begins, and you realize, wow, I don't know what I'm doing, right? I have no experience. I'm a football player, right? So for him, he would have just been a rubber stamp for Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
Not even the Republican Party, but for Donald Trump.
Absolutely.
Because the Republican Party did not seek out Herschel Walker. It was Donald Trump. His Herschel Walker's son said that Donald Trump himself made several calls to Herschel Walker, urging him to run. So, one thing about Donald Trump, what he expects from you is loyalty. Not loyalty to the Republican Party, not loyalty to the American people, not even loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, which, by the way, Donald Trump says parts of it should be removed. He wants loyalty to him and him alone.
Yeah, they should remove that part that says I'm 3/5 of a man.
Well, yeah, they can rip that out.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's still there.
It is still there, and nobody is debating that. What he wants taken out is the section as it relates to elections. He's still saying that he is a legitimate president and that he should be reinstalled as the president of the United States.
I'm sad that the DOJ decided not to charge him with what they said with the what do they call that thing when they with the
January 6th
committee? Without contempt of court or whatever it was.
Right.
Yeah, they decided not to charge him with that, which I think was
Donald Trump has a number of issues, a number of legal issues that eventually somebody's going to charge him. Because now I believe that his tax records have been turned over. In New York, members of his inner circle have been found guilty on a number of I think tax evasion or tax evasion related charges. And, I think for Donald Trump, I think the noose is tightening. People say that because he was president, that, he'll never see the inside of a jail cell. Well, I don't know. I mean, he fought tooth and nail not to have his tax returns released.
Mm-hmm.
And now that they're in the hands of the committee, eventually it'll come out that, this man hasn't paid a dime in taxes in how many years? If you're going to put Al Capone in jail for not paying taxes, well, what are you going to do with Donald Trump? So I don't know, but it's sad that here we are 2 years post-election or the election of Joe Biden, and we're still having conversation about Donald Trump. Most presidents, once they leave office, they go into the private sector, they'll build their library or whatever, right? And they'll quietly fade off into obscurity. But not Donald Trump. He is still trying to control the agenda from the Southern White House, Mar-a-Lago. And unfortunately for him, the Republican Party is shifting away. You know, I saw something the other day. There is a show on HBO Max, and it's about Rupert Murdoch and his family. And one of the people that Donald Trump admired was a man by the name of Roy Cohn.
I remember him.
Okay, so as you know, Roy Cohn
the attorney,
was, the lawyer for the rich and famous. And Donald Trump said he very much admired Roy Cohn. He was a mentor to him. And Roy Cohn's his playbook was to attack, to stay on the attack, right? Never to apologize, never to say I'm sorry, but to always be on the offensive or on the offense. And that is Donald Trump's playbook. He never says I'm sorry, never says I'm wrong, right? He's always on the attack. And now that attack has turned on other Republicans. He's going after Mitch McConnell. He's going after Governor DeSantis of Florida, who he views as a rival in the 2024 presidential election. So he's attacking other Republicans now. The same people that you said that used to support you. Now you've turned on them. What does that do for the Republican Party as a whole? It fractures the party. And, with that infighting going on amongst the Republicans, that's only going to serve well, just only going to help the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it,
Well, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
You're 100% right with that, but the senator from Alaska, she decides to become an independent.
From Alaska?
Yes.
Murkowski?
No, it wasn't the female.
Oh, you're talking about Arizona?
She was from
Sinema. Kristen Sinema.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's Arizona.
Yeah. That was interesting.
Well, she said she's going to caucus with the Democrats. So it's really not going to affect them in terms of votes, right? And the deciding vote is going to be Kamala Harris anyway. So they're still going to have that majority in the Senate. But what I'm seeing is, and we're getting away from Herschel Walker, but what I'm seeing in the Republican Party, there's the infighting, for the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, who was a staunch Trump supporter, wants to be elected Speaker of the House. But there are a number of Republicans that have said openly that there's no way in hell they're going to vote for Kevin McCarthy. And then you have the rift between those who were supporters of Trump and who remain supporters of Trump, and those who are saying, look, we need to shift away from Trump because look at the election cycles. Look at what it's costing us. We're losing elections, right? And unless we change our tactics, we're going to lose more, right? We're barely hanging on to a majority in the House. We just won that back. Unless we change our tactics, right? What's going to happen is, come 2024, the Democrats, who have been organizing well, may win back, both chambers of Congress. So for the Republican Party, they got a lot of soul searching to do. And I must say that Herschel Walker is not the answer. You know what? That's enough about Herschel Walker. I mean, I wish him well, just not in the political arena. If you want to be a commentator, talking about sports, specifically football, hey, man, more power to you. But, in terms of politics, no. And, another hot topic is the release of Brittany Griner from a Russian prison. And, it's been long enough. And I applaud those who worked to get her home. This woman was a political pawn. Who goes to jail for 9 years for having a vape pen or some vape pens, right? I mean, this woman wants a political football, only because of America's involvement in the war in Ukraine. If this war was not going on and America was not supporting Ukraine militarily, Brittany Griner probably would have been home, within days. But because of this ongoing Cold War, which is reignited, this woman was in jail for nearly a year. I think very recently she was transferred to one of these Russian, penal colonies.
Penal colonies,
right?
Hard labor camp.
Hard labor. It never should have gotten that far. Now they're talking about there's another American, Paul Whelan, who is still being held in Russia. And the media's reporting that he's asking, well, why am I still here if Brittany Griner has been released? Well, it's a case-by-case basis, right? I'm not sure what Paul Whelan is charged with, but I do know that in Brittany Griner's case, this woman had vape pens, right? And they charged her with, distribution, intent to sell. You want to sell a vape pen? This is cannabis oil, right? Supposedly, it's not highly addictive.
Well,
like some of these other drugs.
What's ironic about that whole situation with her is, I don't think she really knew what she had, because the woman's very intelligent, and I believed her story when she said she didn't realize what it was, because with all the advertisement all over the place, they say CBT or CBD or whatever it is, right? You see the advertisement of that all over the place. They said that it's legal. There's no THC in it.
Exactly.
You can rub it on your body for pain and all this other stuff.
Yep.
It's medicinal. So if she had that and it came from one of those places with the CBD oil and pens and so on and so forth, I can see her having that.
Right.
She
said it was prescribed.
Yeah. So that was nothing but political.
That's all it was. Right?
Nothing but political.
It is because of this ongoing Cold War. And we need to be realistic. When you watch the media coverage of the war in Ukraine, we are castigating Vladimir Putin and the Russian people. We've called him a war criminal. We said that his tactics are brutal. Well, what the hell did we do in Iraq for 20 years, in Afghanistan for 20 years? Right. Let's be realistic. We were at war with these nations. Did we kill people? Yes, we did.
Every day.
Did we bomb away at these countries?
Every day.
Yes, we did. Did innocent civilians die? Abso-freaking-lutely. So what did we do any different in Iraq and Afghanistan than he is doing in Ukraine? He might have better, he might have more justification than we ever had, because first of all, Iraq had nothing to do with the events of 9/11. So there was no reason for us to invade Iraq. There had to be another hidden agenda. And let's be realistic, it's oil, amongst other things. So for Vladimir Putin, America and NATO have been expanding for years. So we have basically put ballistic missiles right at his front door. In Poland, in Latvia, and so many other former Soviet satellite nations. In 1961, when the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Russians put missiles into Cuba, America said we're prepared to go to war. And
I think the U.S. government never forgot that, and they prepared themselves to never have that threat like that against the United States again. And That's why NATO became NATO as big as it came, because Russia was the threat to the world and to the United States. So yes, you're right. Putin got every missile around pointed at him, just like Iraq. The Israelis got all their missiles pointed at them. So Putin has a right to be afraid.
Every country has a right to self-determination and to protect themselves, right? And that is all he's doing. He is protecting himself and the Russian people. And, we do it every day. I mean, not only have we been supporting Ukraine, right, with hundreds of billions of dollars in war material and funding, we've also, when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, all you did was, and I understand her reason for going there. She went there to increase the output of microchips, which we desperately need.
Mm-hmm.
But in that visit, that unannounced visit, all you did was create or heighten the tensions between mainland China and Taiwan.
Yeah, she did.
So now what we're doing is we're creating almost a second front in the Cold War, right? We're not helping the situation, we're only making it worse. So I can't, say that, Putin is wrong.
Well,
we want to say he is, but he has justification.
Let me just jump in. I'm looking at some of the comments here.
I'm just looking at some of those.
Leonard Christian, man, he's dropping some jewels here on some of these comments here. Back to Griner. He said she was locked up for her own arrogance.
I saw that.
You saw that?
Mm-hmm.
And then he mentioned about missile steel in Cuba being 90 miles away. From what I understand, those missiles might still be there or have been removed or are so outdated that they're not functional. But it's been said that. But I do believe that the Russians sent their people in there to update and modernize, that missile defense in Cuba.
Initially in '61, those missiles were removed, right? That was part of the agreement, that those missiles would be removed. Now, since that time, we have embargoed Cuba, and we have a contingent of Marines on the island of Cuba in Guantanamo. And of course, they are monitoring, all movement of military hardware or material, right? So it is unlikely that there are offensive weapons in Cuba today capable of doing major damage to American cities, right? That's doubtful. Because, if you look at the cars they're driving in Cuba, they're driving cars from the 50s.
Hey, I would love to go to Cuba just to buy cars.
Exactly. But these cars are from the 50s, right?
Yes.
In Cuba, they can barely afford to feed themselves, let alone maintain missiles, right? I just don't see it, right? And people said, I've heard it before, that the missiles were put back in place. But we're talking about, technology from the latter half of the 19th century or 20th century. But anyway, that was our segment today on What the Hell, right? I would love to talk to someone from Georgia just to get their perspective on this election and elections moving forward. What do they see happening in Georgia in years to come? But this is a conversation that, we're going to revisit, because we need to be politically aware. And we need to be politically aware because of things like voter disenfranchisement, people being purged from the rolls. Down in Georgia, had these long lines. Why? why not open up more voting sites, right? So, this is purposely done to dissuade people from voting. But the people's voice needs to be heard. But just another, brother hour, just kicking it with my man TP Square. And we're gonna have some more brother hours. We're just gonna sit back and kick it. So, for those of you who listened and joined us, we thank you for your input. We thank you for continuing to support Gynesis Radio. And, continue to listen, continue to support, and continue to, send us messages on what you think, because some of it will be incorporated into some of the discussions we have. But, we thank you and continue to support and join us next Saturday right here on Morning Room. Have a good morning.